Hey guys, I'm Dan, here to help you make the transition to ultralight backpacking. If you like the work that I'm doing here, please hit the subscribe button and that'll help me to continue to make these videos for you. Thank you very much. Okay, so you've made the decision to give it a try, to start shifting to lighter gear, but the big question you're facing now is where to start. That's what we're going to be talking about today. So typically people think first about the big stuff, what we call the big three, and that's the pack and shelter and sleep system. And we call those the big three because they are the heaviest items in all of your gear. But before you think about changing those out, I'd like to suggest that first you think about changing your shoes. And what I mean by that is switching out from the big old clunky giant leather hiking boots and switching to something like this, more of a low trail runner. Now, why is that useful? Well, let me talk about several reasons. First is they're just lighter. So these are my old Scarpas. They weigh just a little under 5 pounds. These guys are called Saucony. They're the Exodus style, and they're a little under 2 pounds. So that's a 3-pound difference from switching from this to this. Now there's a saying that 1 pound on the end of your feet is equivalent to 5 pounds in your pack in terms of energy used. And that kind of makes sense if you think about the pendulum action of the leg, and any little weight on the end of the leg is going to make a big difference. So first point about switching out is just how much lighter, how much less energy you're going to use hiking down the trail. Second is these tend to be cheaper. I've got 3 pairs here that I'm using these days, and these all run around 100 to 150 tops. Most often I'm able to get them for less on sale, and usually around $100. Now these guys start at $150 and go up, right? You can spend $400 or $500, maybe even more, on big heavy hiking boots. So these are cheaper, although to be fair, I should point out that these guys last forever, so in the long run maybe they're cheaper. Typically the low runners, the trail runners, sorry, last me probably about 2 to 3 seasons. I typically hike about 200 to 300 miles in a season, so I feel pretty good if I get 3 seasons out of these. Lately I've been looking at some forums for traditional backpackers, and quite often you see the advice that's being given to people that are new to backpacking to make sure you spend some time breaking in your hiking boots before you go on your first big trip. Well, that's a second advantage of the low trail runners, is there's no break-in. You can just put them on and go and not have to worry about stuff. And related to that is thinking about blisters. I very rarely have any blister problems with the trail runners. The first time I strapped on these great big Scarpas and I went for a hike 2 miles up to a mountain lake, by the time I got there I had these dollar-sized blisters in the back of my heels, so certainly you're a lot less likely to have blister problems with the trail runners. Probably the biggest concern that people have in making this transition is worry about injuries, right? Primarily ankle injuries. There's, kind of the conventional wisdom says when you're out on the trail, there's uneven ground, and you're going to need that ankle support to prevent any twisting, right? In reality, or maybe I should say another argument, is that with lack of ankle support, you build up the muscles around the ankle, and that's actually your natural ankle support is much stronger than any external ankle support, and I think that holds true for anything, any joint, where you're talking about knees or any other joint. If you put on a brace, that helps in the short run, but in the long run it weakens the muscle and makes you more prone to injury. So I can tell you that I've been using trail runners like this for probably a little more than 15 years now, and I personally am prone to twisted ankles, and I've never had a single injury with the trail runners. So It's really not true that you need ankle support in order to avoid ankle twisting. Now, a third consideration is towards the end of the day, when you start getting tired, people tend to trip on stuff, whether it's rocks or roots in the trail. If you're wearing a big clunky shoe like this, you're more likely to trip on it, and you're also going to be more tired. And when we get tired, we trip more. So having a lighter shoe at the end of your foot means you're more likely to pick it up and not trip over stuff. And if you are preventing yourself from a full face plant, that certainly means less injuries with the low hikers versus the big clunky shoes. So if you watched the first video, you know that I mentioned that I want to be talking not just about ultralight gear, but also about the strategies of ultralight backpacking. And this is one of the key ones. Is the best advantage of wearing the low hikers is that when you come to a stream crossing, you can just walk through the river. You don't have to stop and switch out to special river shoes. That a lot of us fear getting wet because we think wet equals cold and cold equals hypothermia. So the truth is you can be wet, and as long as you're not cold, it's not a problem. So you can just walk through the streams and keep walking, and before too long your feet dry out the shoe and then you're just fine. Now, a lot of the books that talk about ultralight backpacking like to say that you dry very quickly. I think that's a relative term. It usually takes about 2 to 4 hours after a stream crossing for my feet to get dry. But if you compare that to these never dry, right? So, and it's kind of inevitable that your boots are going to get wet when you're out hiking. It just takes a little downpour to soak all of the underbrush along the trail, and when you're walking along, that brushes against your leg, runs down the leg, and soaks the boot. So you're probably going to get wet anyway in most cases. Much better to have a shoe that dries quickly versus something that takes about a month to dry. Now, the advantage of walking through the streams is that you also lose the weight of the river shoes. So these are my old Tevas that I used to carry for river crossings. These weigh about 1 pound 10 ounces. So I don't have to bring those at all anymore. Switching from these to the trail runners saved me 3 pounds. That's another 1.5 pounds, more than 1.5 pounds. So that's 4.5 pounds that I've reduced from my weight just by making this switch. So it's a very beneficial switch to make, and you've also saved an enormous amount of time, because the old way of crossing a stream was that you had to stop, take off your pack, switch out your shoes to the river shoes, go across, then you got to towel off your shoe, put the boots back on. That whole process takes me about a half an hour. So it's a really wonderful, freeing thing to come up to a stream and just walk straight through it without worrying about it. Certainly I look for a convenient log or a log hop. I'm going to take that if I can, but if that isn't available, it's nice just to save the time of walking straight through the river. There's 3 things that these shoes all have in common. First, you might notice that they're all more mesh than leather. And the reason for that is just that the mesh dries quicker than the leather does. So you really want to try to shoot for something that's as much mesh as it can be. Now, the Sauconys are the most mesh. The downside of that is the mesh tends to wear out a little quicker, but overall it's a good trade-off. Usually they've got, coverage in the areas that get the most abrasion, so that's not a huge concern. But the second thing that they have in common, you might see this if I hold these up. See that gold seal? They all have Vibram soles. Now, I will confess that this is kind of a personal preference. It's not something I've ever seen in writing on any of the forums or in books. That's just my experience. I've tried other shoes that were, proprietary soles, didn't have the Vibram, swore that they were just as good. They weren't. So my personal preference is that I just stick with the Vibram soles. Now, these are The Saucony Exodus I said earlier. Unfortunately, the Saucony seems to have gone away from the Vibram soles, so I don't think you can get these anymore. The other thing that all these have in common is that they don't have Gore-Tex, because Gore-Tex tends to not breathe very well, but more importantly it doesn't dry as quickly. So you want to truly try to find not Gore-Tex shoes, and quite frankly it makes me giggle to think about why would you try to waterproof a short shoe like that? You're going to get wet anyway, so it's not going to do you any good. But I started to say the different shoes. This is the North Face Hedgehog. Now I was doing some searching online just this morning trying to find this, and unfortunately it seems to have gone just to Gore-Tex versions of this. I can't find a non-Gore-Tex version, even though that shoe's been around a long time and is a really good hiking shoe. So North Face, if you're listening, please bring back the non-Gore-Tex Hedgehog. Enough said. These are Vasque shoes, and there seems to be several styles of Vasque shoe that are still available that have the Vibram soles. Unfortunately, I don't know this particular style. I've forgotten that name, but in my searching I found 3 or 4 styles of Vasque shoes that still had the Vibram soles and lots of mesh, so you're good there. I should mention Merrell's also are a brand that has a lot of different versions with the Vibram soles. Personally, I have not had good luck with the Merrell shoes fitting my feet, but that's just probably an individual quirk, and you might not run into that same problem, so Merrell's are certainly worth taking a look at. One other small point about picking out shoes is you want to try to size up at least a half a size, just because the feet swell when they get hot from the hard work of hiking, and so you want to have a little extra space, especially in the length, to allow for the feet to swell. Now unfortunately, shoe manufacturers these days seem to have completely given up on insoles. I think they just assume that you're going to use some extra secondary orthotics. So when I do buy a new pair of shoes, I just grab the Superfeet. I like the green Superfeet, and just take it for granted that when I'm going to buy a new pair of shoes, I just have to buy a new pair of insoles also. So do that, and they just slip right in. Usually their sizing is pretty good. I've never had to trim those myself. Now the reason that I am suggesting that you switch your shoes first is because that's what worked for me. I mentioned in the last video, if you happen to see that I did a deep dive into ultralight backpacking about 5 years ago, but in reality I sort of dipped my toe in, if you'll pardon the pun, much earlier than that. Way back in about 2002, I read this book, Ray Jardine's Beyond Backpacking. Now I really wanted to mention this. Maybe you wouldn't bother reading a 500-page book about backpacking theory, but I'm really grateful to Ray Jardine for writing this book, because it really shook me loose from a lot of the assumptions that I was making about what backpacking had to be. And quite frankly, a lot of the stuff that he suggests in here I don't do anymore. I tried it back when I first read that book, gave it a few trips, and a lot of the stuff didn't work out, so I went back to traditional backpacking gear except for my shoes. I kept the trailrunners, the short hiking shoes, even though I continued carrying a 45-pound pack for probably more than 10 years afterwards. So that's why I feel pretty comfortable making this suggestion, is that I'm pretty sure you will be happy with switching the shoes out first, just because there's so many benefits and really virtually no drawbacks. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you found this video useful, please hit the like button. And next time, we're going to be finally getting into the big 3, and I'll be talking about shelters. And I can't wait to tell you about my favorite shelter. So please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss that one. All right, thanks a lot. Take care.